What does it sound like recording there?
Testing. Hello.
Nice. So, yeah, some context to begin.
So, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, these are two projects completed by me, Felix Wilson, and
Michael Becker. That's me.
as in the Timber Studio at Isala, which was Timber Studio is a unit that runs at the end of a student's undergraduate education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 4 years.
4 years.
For 3 months, from January to like April.
To April. So a semester studio. We completed this a year apart, so we were part of different cohorts.
Yeah, you were 21 to 22.
22, and you were 22, 23.
Yeah.
And for both of us, the projects were, I think, a continuation of sort of work that we had been thinking about, or especially in your case.
And
I think,
it was like an element of like the dissertation, which happened before, that was like followed through. I think that's probably like a good place to begin.
Yeah.
Maybe is like
the
before, before we came to the studio, and that how that.
Oh, we had quite strong ideas, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Wanting.
I think so.
Yeah.
I remember you talking about the open studio before, and that being something.
This idea of wanting to sort of craft a bit of your own line of inquiry, but then I think we were both placed into this very rich studio taught by Rachel and Jamie that actually then provided us with a set of constraints to work with.
Yeah, and I think actually like in a lot of cases like pushed like what we would have done like much further.
Much further, yeah.
So it's like it's not.
And maybe we haven't really talked about this much, but maybe this is an attempt to build the culture of that studio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to sort of, I know we are both at a stage now working in Edinburgh and wanting to, in many ways, I guess, reflect on the work. And this feels like a contribution that's of value to us and potentially others.
Yeah.
So maybe we start by how we presented the work.
Yeah.
And I feel the presentation is actually kind of key to the thoughts that we both had going on.
Yeah, there's like an aspect of like curation and representation. I think. So I guess I think what I would really want to hear actually is maybe a bit like if you want to start with what you were thinking about, because I think in a lot of ways like my project was like a response, like I suppose like to, I mean not just yours but like the rest of Timber Studio,
right?
But like in particular I think it provided like a kind of like a model in a way of like, okay, this is like the work that has come before, and like this is something which I'm kind of like in conversation with, right? And so I think like I really admired and really enjoyed your project. So there's an aspect of that in which like the two, there's a reflection there, I suppose. So I'm like quite keen. I feel like I spent a bit of time with your project.
Right,
so
looking, in the same way I looked at projects that come from people before.
Right.
I think all work in a school is a continuation of what has come before, in forms and what has been done. And this is perhaps a useful reflection on that. I don't know what I was after, but I guess looking back on the project, I see a lot of elements of myself in it, which I wasn't immediately aware that I was producing at the time.
Right.
Like the project definitely united my like an understanding of landscape that I have from growing up in a rural context, and like being embedded in the milieu of the city. And a civic understanding of what architecture is. And there's that tension that the studio poses through its brief to do with material and what's at hand. And
I think that connection between the city and the landscape is like really a key kind of thing, you know, like how do you develop that relationship?
Yes.
And when you begin to like bring material, you know, into it and bring material closer, right? You actually have to like ask yourself like, well, what, like, how are the landscapes produced and what are they producing?
Yeah.
And what is the city producing and how is the city produced? You know. Like,
let's get into that, because I think I think as we flick through the work.
Yeah.
Maybe if we just start with like the initial presentation of it.
Yeah.
Like I had this. We both were invested in physical artifacts.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing through the process of our work as well.
Yeah.
We were invested in making things. I made a book as my publication and then scanned it back in as how it was presented. And the cover is a bit of a game in myself, and it's a grid, but there's dots missing from that grid, which is an exact relation, or it's a narrative of the title, A Scarcity of Attention.
I've never noticed that.
But you probably there's a few dots missing that are just they're just one of those little things that you put into the project. But the way you present your project in a box, I think also has a similar.
I've got. There was a preface that I wanted.
Well, actually, just go to the titles, because the titles of.
But again, like I feel like it was like a kind of response in a way. You know, there's like, and you know, I guess like having like that kind of subtitle, which I'm not sure.
No, but I think our works are titled. We gave very specific titles to our work for a reason. In your case, in the habit of building.
I think I was really interested in habits, I guess. You know, that was like a recurring thing, and that was something that came up in review. Is like, well, you're you know, interested in these kind of timescales, and it's, you know, and really how you develop those kind of rhythms and habits that become like the architecture in a way, you know, and it's like a facilitation of that kind of habit.
And it's in a similar way, my title, A Scarcity of Attention, is actually in direct relation to how people are in habit with, or are inhabiting. In many ways, habit and inhabit are very similar. In terms of the actions that are going on, and that. It's in narratives of how people are using something, and maybe that's a direction. I'm not sure. I don't think I'd been pushed in that direction. Right. But if I had perhaps had a freer line of inquiry. No,
definitely. I think that, and I suppose like there's a bit of a play in mine on, you know, habit building and like building habits. You know, I think it was like I think having when I came to the studio, I was interested in timber, I think, and I didn't quite realize this until sort of like halfway through, but you know, the interest in timber really came from the fact that, you know, it was this like kind of accessible thing, right?
Yes,
and it allowed this
it's
like facilitation
one of the cheapest resources.
Right, exactly, you know, and like it allows you to have, there's an impermanence to it that allows you to have this like kind of consistent engagement, or like need to have a consistent engagement, right? To kind of like pay attention, right?
Well, there's impermanence to it, there's also permanence to like, as a material, it also lasts. Perhaps not, you know, like there's that piece of timber that washed up as part of a boat. Like it can survive, but its survival is perhaps by a bit more chance than something. Something of masonry or
I think there was like an aspect of like the precarity of it. You know, you're not making something forever, right? But like what can be forever is this thing which you build up, you know, in yourself, in your community, you know, as like skills, as relationships, you know, and in a way there's the like architecture as the facilitation of that.
And that's fundamental, because it's about, these projects they're about timber, but they're also about community. Well, should we maybe start to like open?
Sure.
Through
I think the presentation, which like the modes of presentation, I was really just before we talked about it, was I mean it's like this green box really, which was like this you know, Duchamp's got this big accumulation of all these like scraps of paper and notes and stuff like that. So the idea was like, okay, you know, you've actually accumulated all of these like threads and thoughts, and to kind of present them in a way which is maybe less linear, you know, like you've still got a hierarchy in the sense that you know there's different sizes, but there's like a sense that you know you find it as you want, right? And as things like grab your attention, I suppose.
But it's interesting you talk about that, because actually the way I indexed my work
was
there's a chronological reading, which is the story of a project per se, which is of page 1 to page whatever. But then I also created different ways you could read the work. For example, a day in Macroft, which is a way of understanding the work through a series of illustrations and habitations, and then I also catalogued it in other ways, such as texts, processes, details, references.
It's like a choose your own adventure.
It's a choose your own way, and I think in a similar way you have that in terms of you could understand your project through perhaps picking up a bit of it. Yeah, exactly. But then you understand the body of work through.
There's a kind of like a you know, it's kind of like piecemeal, it's like fragmented, you know, way of like engaging with something in the way that like you've like curated this sort of thing. I think what I really admired about yours was like there was a like yours is kind of clever in the way that you managed to kind of like pack all of this stuff in, you know, into something that is quite like lean, while at the same time offering all of these kind of like modes of reading, right?
But
you know, it's like you can keep turning over the cube.
But I don't think I allowed for baggage.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think I allowed for it in a way that your work has a lot of richness in just allowing there to be, just allowing the project to be there and have all the bits along the way.
Yeah, I think that was like
I was perhaps,
a real investment.
I was perhaps too clinical in trying to clean it up.
But I think the clinical, there's something in like how clinical it is, because it's very suggestive, you know, like there is like a suggestion of like there's something, you know, that you've really like pared this down, you know.
Well, and this comes back to I guess a bit to do with my interest before this, which was a dissertation on resolution in terms of how to resolve, how much information are you putting out, mainly to do with image culture, to resolve something. And I don't know, like I've maybe resolved it too far. Whereas I would say yours is less resolved, but actually has more suggestions because of that. Or perhaps I went for resolution for a precision of resolution. But then in my writing for it, I was much more like, it's left open-ended to try and suggest a way of a community dealing with issues of food security, or food security, social insecurity, material waste.
I don't know. There's something which is like you've made this. It's like a kind of snow globe, right? There's like
that's a nice way of
it's like
thinking about
it's
it.
this like really compressed, you know, kind of like you know, artifact, right? Which is then like suggestive of like everything else that was like around it.
Yeah,
and I feel like
whereas with your project, I feel like there's much more of there is a sense that you're inhabiting the workplace that it happened in.
But then here we've got it as well, right? You know,
there's a bit of that, but it's a bit more. I can think of a photo of like a scene from a studio. Maybe it's actually towards the end. Let me see. But I think the way we both use studios was also important.
Right.
Well, obviously we weren't there together to share that, but I think we both sense.
Definitely. You know, there's like.
I can't see it right there, but.
Maybe it's just before.
Was it just before me? But here. But there's a sense of just working in a studio, and that I know. I really associate with your work, where you feel like you can feel how the process in it a lot more. And that really came from the dissertation away, and that interest in like I think it was a way of like trying to consider representation and like trying to consider like what you're representing, and like a lot of the time architecture, you know, leaves out loads of things, and that
one of those things is like the work that actually goes into building, right?
Right. Yes.
And so,
And that's,
there's like my kind of approach was like, well, okay, you could like, directly show, people working on the building,
Yes.
That's one thing I did do. But the other thing I was like, well, if I can, I'm not actually building anything, it's like it's a paper project, right? But if I can somehow evoke the work that goes in to the paper project, right, that will, give this, I don't know, maybe give an impression. Perhaps that's like a cheap way of thinking about it.
I think it references back to a thing that as student projects, they are only ever as real as what you make them.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure. Like, I definitely think I was very much living the project.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I was inhabiting the mental space of almost I don't know being in it. Especially when I started making like when I was thinking about how it was inhabited and.
Well, you've got these like wonderful
collages, which but in the same way, your drawings, to get some of them up, are many-fold, tenfold more illustrative of what it means to sort of be in something, and a sense of, or I don't really think of it quite as much as that. I think more of ones that are the mix of plan and section,
right?
Or like the mix of plan and elevation, or where.
This last one.
Yeah, this one. This is the one that really does it for me.
Well, but I guess that kind of comes from that sense of like, well, the drawing is kind of inhabiting itself in a way, right? It's like the accumulation of, like, you feel the sense like of the time that has been actually spent maybe sitting in front of the drawing. I don't know. I've never really thought about it that way. So that's kind of nice.
That's interesting.
And like, I guess like kind of not. Part of it was conscious and part of it wasn't so much, but that beginning to leave in those masking tape things and like feeling that accumulation of layers and like that kind of there's the sort of like fog of like graphite which kind of comes out of it, which is like almost unintentional. That's just like the way the drawings are processed.
This brings us to quite an important distinction in the work, whereas I was very invested in physical models, but digital drawings.
Right.
And digital form, and whereas you were very, very you were using physical drawings as a way of inhabiting it, and there's that connection that you have to them, which I think is very important to the work. And actually, well, I think it's an example where the process and the ideas behind the project fold into the outputs. I think, but on the other hand, the drawings which you do also like, and the kind of collages which you've got, like really, they do, they're not trying to erase the fact that they're digital. It's like it's not that kind of render or that kind of collage where it's it's intentionally digital. Right, exactly. Which I think is like such a it's or like
so
the way trees were drawn as well.
Right. It's like so conspicuous, right? That it also invokes like the process of like by which like you were kind of making them, right? And in a way thinks about like the spaces in which like those kind of things are imagined, right? The way when you if you are making images or imagining things like on a screen or in a digital space, and then the way you can imagine something on paper, it's like I don't know. I always think the project exists like somewhere between like the site which you've got, the kind of studio which you're in, and then like your own head, right? It's like a weird like trio, and it's like somewhere in the middle there's this like amorphous kind of
But I actually also see that now working, but it's and actually sometimes the project exists differently in different people's heads.
Right. Exactly. And that's like always a kind of, even with like real places, right? That's So even more so, I think in. But what I think is interesting about the forms of representation is that they don't, there's not an aspiration to a kind of precision of like reality, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
I guess you framed it in terms of resolution. I think precision is as I don't know. I prefer.
No, I think the word precision is nice. Yeah.
But
yeah.
it's like a precision of intent, right?
Yeah,
you know what
yeah.
I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
like the precision isn't to like communicate something, even if the thing which you're communicating isn't like as razor sharp. Like
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's like a fuzziness to the reality
Mm.
which you're trying to get across, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe
and,
not
yeah,
reality,
yeah.
I don't
And
know.
I think in many ways that like this work is like student work in that sense has to rely on a slight fuzziness
Yeah.
in order to make it real in some way.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think it's also interesting how like you see a lot of renders now done by practices that are definitely conscious of this, where they're not photoreal, but they then apply a texture to the render in order to make it fuzzy and somehow.
Right, yeah.
It almost increases its accessibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
Well, maybe we should go and sort of look through
Sure.
in like I don't know. Maybe we need to go back and talk about timber.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
And how we got to that, or how that was then influential on the work. So I think we've talked about this, that I guess we both came in with ideas in our head perhaps of what projects could be, and that then adjusting those to the studio was then actually about embracing a process that had been created for us to follow, and that actually that process of a series of exercises is actually quite important. I think you should take it away.
I don't know. I'll just sort of
your,
flip through this. I think.
But it's almost like diary-like in terms of, which is really nice. I think it was an honesty to saying a time and a place and.
Yeah. That was kind of the start. I suppose you're trying to, I guess, like. I think when I thought of the timber research, it was really. I didn't want it to be sort of different from the rest of the project.
Right.
In a way.
Same here. I had this idea that I was wanting to work towards a body of work.
Absolutely from the start. You know, and
which is perhaps a bit forced, but I think we've definitely both seen the success of creating a body of work.
And that kind of I guess like coming back to sort of like curation of it, you know. But so the three sites, you know, which were the three places we visited, you know, that was like, I thought, okay, you know, why only have one site of intervention? You know, that's like that's going to be the end of the project, right? Like, why not make all three? You know, and actually, I added one more of my own. To have, you know, let them all be considered, you know, the site of the project. And actually like treat them as such. So when we went to visit, you know, you are able to apply the same methodology, the same like way of working, or looking at the site as you did to the one which you're, you know, making architectural invention. Right?
And actually, in a funny way, I titled my first investigations to the forest in the book. I told them reading the forest. And the first drawing of a forest I gave in the book, I then also gave an image of the site drawn in the same wireframe view. So it was to do with also reading the site. It's those tactics for understanding of a place, the field work,
Exactly, and I suppose there's like, you know, just that placing those few elements in context with one another, you know, beginning to.
The sort of the placing next to and the juxtaposition of things,
and I think that really, I tried to do that kind of like spatially on one hand, but also in terms of time. Like there's like I feel like there was like an attention paid to like timelines and timescales. I think that sort of came from the dissertation. My supervisor Laura suggested that you know, I kind of a way of like organizing my thoughts, which was sort of like in kind of discrete chapters, was to place everything, you know, all the characters, all the kind of places, the events on a single kind of timeline, right? And that's that thing which could sort of like begin to tie them together. I guess like in a superficial way. But to then like
interesting, and then
focus on the kind of like not just the spatial kind of relationships, but also those like kind of temporal relationships, the like where they sync up and where they don't sync up, right? And that projection into the like the future, right? I guess like that's like the big thing. It's like it's always like speculative. It's always like the future, right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know. These were also, I mean, in your case, they're also collective. This initial was a group, and I sort of took a more like we made a big grid of drawings. I'm not sure if we have this grid in the book, but
is that one, right?
This one. But it sort of it took components from other parts to do like there's parts to do sort of the texture of the forest in this digital. And I guess in a way I was striving to try and create that feeling of being in a forest in a digital way, but it's highly abstracted. But then that feeling also represents the resources that are in it and how they're organized. And then how those resources, I think maybe it comes a bit later. I paired it with a detail actually, in terms of.
Oh, nice!
Yeah, here it is. In terms of then what you can extract from the forest.
Right.
Because ultimately, this way into a project, looking at timber, was to look at what is to hand. I'm actually. I think the distinction here is that all this was remote, sort of desktop work, and yours was very much in the field. Which is,
But I kind of liked what you said earlier about, this kind of like, again, you've got these like three elements on the page, right? And like, okay, there's an attention to the quality of like what it's like to be in the space, right? Sort of in a quite an abstract, right? Very beautiful but abstract way. And then you directly pair that with like quantity, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like how much, where is it, how far apart is it?
How far apart is it?
Right.
And
so like that, I think that was like something which I kind of came onto towards the end, was just like, okay, there's this like tension between, like quantity and quality, really. And that especially when it comes to representation. So
I think we should just pause to check this.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it was maybe done at time. But that's recording. Okay, let's continue. Nice. Another half an hour.
Cool. And I think with this like quantity and quality, you get to some of those like kind of like economical, political, social kind of like questions which the brief is really asking, right? Which is like, what's the value of like this space in the city, or what's the value of this land, what's the value of this forest? How can they be valued, right? You've got, I don't know, like forest drawings and extraction, right? Like how is the drawing like complicit in that extraction in a way, and how is like kind of like that measurement.
And then and what are people then extracting from a city?
Right. It's like those kind of readings of maps.
And I guess in many ways these are creating fictions for ourselves for the work to then rely on.
Right.
Like it's it's not entirely a fiction, but it's a story of the project in terms of they're an understanding, and it's in many ways it's. I felt by doing this I was limiting the scope of the work in some way, which is in many ways perhaps poor blanking out. Blanking out like opportunity.
Right.
To an extent, you sort of have to.
But I think that's exactly like kind of what I felt was like strong about the portfolio in a way, because like it does like in how compressed it is. It is suggestive of this like whole other world which it is also part of. Whereas like I think I couldn't really. I had the opposite thing. It's the same with curation. It's like I couldn't really bear to like throw any scrap of paper away. I wanted to stuff them all in the box, and let the audience like just
let them choose.
Be in that sort of environment, right? And there's like almost I don't know. It's like a whole ecology of like all these different like things which are like really big drawings to like these small little scraps of stuff that all like sort of like, I guess I like commingling. I don't know if that
it's a bit like inviting someone into your kitchen as you're cooking.
Right.
And whereas this is, I'm a bit more like, oh, here's the thing that I've got out the oven. And I feel I wasn't revealing enough of everything that came along the way.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I think, but the I don't know.
Or the messiness in ways.
I think it's that was one thing I really was like, I think, grappling with when it comes to the curation was like how to like convey that sense, and it didn't feel like, okay, just having like lots of photos of like my desk or whatever, which I like didn't have in the end, right? But like, that kind of like, and I think that links so much with the printed, both our interest in like having like printed documents and like printed stuff. That you're really like curating the experience of like going through this work in a way, right? You sort of like set up a kind of that's kind of like your the mode by which like someone engages with like what you're doing. I guess it's like very like media sort of like oriented way of thinking, I suppose. But just having
you have this bit, it's all
like,
odds and ends,
book of just like all the little kind of like references, which I wanted. I felt like
this is really important though.
Should have sat alongside all the stuff, right? Because it's like
whereas what I did with references is I remember I took a reference and then I then like redrew it for myself. I don't know. It's not there, but I think I could have been more honest in how, odds and ends. It's like, It's,
but I think that like the copying, the redrawing, like that was so much a part of like everything you do, right? It's just like digestion of like all this stuff, right? And I think I wanted to kind of lay it all out. I was like, that was like. That was what I titled this thing, which was just like, I'm copying Duchamp, I'm copying all this other stuff, and it's like, but the weird, what I kind of tried to explain was like, the weird thing that happens when you copy something is like, you sort of like ingest it in a way, and then it never comes out quite exactly the same, So
you create a fiction of what,
of
your understanding.
Exactly, and in a way you're making copies of the site, you're making copies of these projects, and I think that what you did with the scanning the book back in, you make a copy of that again, right? It's like suddenly it's like you have all these like fictions and copies and layers on all these other ones.
It was to make a softness to it,
right? Exactly. But that like as a product of like that, the poor scanning quality of the scanner or something, like there's something. I don't know. They're constantly switching between, the different ways that you're understanding something, right? Whether that's digital, whether that's physical, whether that's in the studio or in the site. I don't know if that makes sense. I think and having like a trace of that movement between those things is really like, it feels like what that process is trying to get across, even if it is like artificial, like. I don't know. I've got like there's a drawing somewhere. I think maybe it's in the site stuff I've got.
But also I think there's like, what was really nice is you had like scans of like a city council letter. Because like these are like, I know that it's almost more real. Like those are the artifacts that you would be recording in a project. In like a real project.
And I think like this is what like I've tried to have that, I like, alongside the photograph of like the kind of like the site work. There's like the drawing of the actual kind of plan which I was drawing off of like while I made the site. And it's like and I think there's like a bit of like brick dust or something which fell in it. So it's like it's like almost like those traces of those translations, right, which happen, right? In
many ways, like looking at the way you had done things, I wish I had almost kept like a log of like daily activity of what I'd done.
Yeah,
You
that
know?
would have been great, like a timesheet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, not to bring things back to the Excel spreadsheet.
Right. Yeah.
But like,
yeah.
I think
The grid.
The grid. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So there is like an organising of things that would have been nice in a project. Of like, today I spent 6 hours, I don't know, doing like looking up this fiction, and like then I spent a whole another day modelling fiction of what I thought could have been this one image, or I spent 5 hours attaching shingles to a model.
Right.
I think there's like a nice honesty to that. That's
that's really great. I think that would be really interesting, you know, and somehow there's that's kind of like adding to the kind of the story, right? As if you have, you know, alongside the fictional day that you have the real day, right? Which you're kind of like
about that in terms of like the scale of the project was like based around a day. Whereas like, I got the sense of time in your project. It projected time over a much longer period, as if it's the construction of this.
Right.
Building,
yeah. And then there's parallels again.
Yeah. Whereas actually, but I'd never thought of that I presented my work as a day. The building only exists for a day. Whereas through your drawings and very, very, very greater vagueness, I'd say. It's not vague. For what we've been previously discussing.
Right.
It suggests sort of like a longer process of how of how the work.
Which is funny because at the beginning of this one, I've got this timeline, right? Like I was like, I want my project to stretch all the way from 1560 all the way to 2065. You know, I couldn't leave out any bit of time. You know, whereas like you've compressed yours into a single day.
Of course, it's Of course,
so there's something kind of like wonderful about that.
Nice. I'd never properly appreciated this. But this is nice because it also references like one thing I didn't embrace very much was the studio's sort of presentation of clients.
Okay.
I was quite resistant to that. But actually every project has a client that's heavily reliant on that client. And so actually there's another honesty to the fact that, you know, someone, you know, the Empty Kitchen's Full Hearts establishes in Grantham and it delivers, at this date, it delivers a million meals, and then there's dates in the futures, and I think that's nice. It's nice to think of a bit of work like this of being longer in some way. Because I definitely have a feeling that this work I gave a lot of myself to it. Almost didn't empty myself of references. At the time I definitely felt empty of reference afterwards. And in need of just absorbing things. But there's a nice sense of projection from this. And I think that's one of the reasons why we originally sort of discussed it would be nice to me recording like this. That actually discuss it, like how these projects inform what we're doing next, and how we then reflect on them, like sort of not day to day, but you know, like you get moments that you look back on things and how you did them.
No, definitely. And I think something which I guess when we were organising this, you kind of said you said to me yesterday, you said you know, it'd be nice to, you know, talk about like how we were feeling when we were doing it. Which I was like, that's like maybe a bit personal. But I thought actually no, that's like kind of a good thing. So, you know, I started thinking about that, and in a way, like I think that, you know, you were talking about projection, and I think, you know, both of us like you know, our time at university was affected by the pandemic.
Massively,
you know, and like I think part of like, at least this was the case for me, I don't know about you, but you know, like some of the you know, the energy that you had, or like the things you couldn't, you know, all of this kind of stuff that was suppressed during that time, right, was like, I felt at least like sort of sublimated a little bit into what was going on, you know. And I think a big part of that was like the idea that during a pandemic I felt like you were sort of unable to plan, right? You were unable to project,
indeed,
right? And I think like a lot of
time scale,
you know, like you know, COVID test, you know, like regulation change, and like you couldn't plan, right? Like you couldn't, and I think I noticed that it was like it was hard for some people to like get back into that.
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
just
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
you know, being able to like set a long-term goal or whatever. I don't know. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's like kind of funny that like to sort of like, you know, get into that, to that be what you're doing, right?
Well, these
Day to
projects
day.
were like, for like when we were both doing them, they
Yeah.
were like in a massive investment.
Right.
A huge investment of yourself.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I don't think that gets talked enough about in education. That was actually that these projects end up being huge investments of yourself, and that it was a lot of, I don't know. To refer back to creating a log of the work,
Right.
I know it would be nice to like write a bit about how you're like feeling or something.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And to have that, you know, maybe it takes place in the portfolio. You know, there's like a
You
have a little face in the corner in a speech bubble. You know, I don't know, maybe
because there's always these works, all the dead ends and the sort of failures that never then get represented in something like this, and that your tutors might have an idea of.
Right.
But I don't know. They might have an idea of it, but then it's how you represent that feels.
Yeah. I mean, that was the same thing for me. Like, I didn't really want to let go of any of those dead ends. I was like, I've got this model here, which I think was like a useful exercise for me. Right, but then I made it, and I was like, well, I don't want this to be my project. I'm not actually that into this, you know. So, but I was like, you know what? That's part of the story, you know. That's part of my log at the time, like you said. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess it comes back to that thing of letting go of the thing being right from the start.
Right. Yeah.
But just having to do things. This is lovely. Yeah.
But that's the thing. You've got this now hierarchy where it's like, well, that's what I tried to do. I guess, you know, where it's like, okay, this was like a study, you know, and its relationship to this is I kind of try to express in like the size of the books themselves. Like this one is small, this is the big one, right? I guess. But I think. Like again, that your creation is suggestive of those dead ends, right? Like there is like a, you know, every sketch, like I felt like had to find its way into this like somehow, you know.
You're definitely drawing way more than I was. You were,
Well, yeah.
I know you were externalizing a lot more thought, I think. In a way that's interesting because you also wrote quite a lot in your project, but I think I don't know. I definitely maybe. I was keeping a log, perhaps, of writing. From quite early on, I was, writing a fair amount, and I ended up.
This is something I wanted to ask you. Because I remember Rachel saying, you know, like, oh, yeah, you know, at this point, Felix just like he stopped doing any design work and just like wrote for 10 days.
Yeah, I wrote,
which sounded like
not quite a lot, but perhaps didn't write for that long. But I definitely wrote. I mean, a lot of it is retrospective.
Right.
But I remember actually before the design was finished, I was writing things to do with like the study model, what the model was giving me, and also wrote. I wrote, but definitely before the design, or like perhaps a program was resolved. Definitely before the program was resolved, I wrote about how I wanted the place to be inhabited and how the clients. But you have to make that up. But you don't have a client that's saying, no, there's someone that arrives at 6 in the morning. You have to make those things up about such and such does this and such does that. And you have to make that fiction and live in that fiction, and writing it down helps quite a lot.
I love that. I think that you're absolutely right on the like commitment to fiction, and I think it's really great that you were like, okay, fiction is like writing, you know, like in a way, you know, it's like that's the way like I have to do it, and that's the way like. And I think that
it's interesting.
I don't know, you know, I think that there is something similar, I guess, and there's like a commitment to, the timescales of writing as well, right? It's like very different. You know, I think when you consider, you know, how long it takes you to do a sketch or drawing, you know, like all this kind of stuff, it's like. To kind of writing something that's halfway decent, right?
But writing is also a way of processing what you're
exactly,
of,
but it has that kind of like precision. It has the kind of like crystal quality, which like the rest of like I don't know. At least like I consider like the book having, right?
Well, and it comes back to the thing of you could. you could read that text and you could get something out of it, but then you could read the image and actually it probably takes you can just look at the image and you go, oh, that's that model. But actually then to really read into it it's a much bigger investment.
Right, exactly.
And
exactly.
You know, that's at least what I felt. It's like it's a lot more that you have to do, I don't know, to understand it.
Whereas I think I don't think I was as concerned with that, right? Like I wanted the drawings to be like much more kind of like physical in a way, right? Where it's like, okay, like the first thing that you understand is like, okay, the making of it, right?
Right.
It's like really kind of like gestural in a way, right? And you almost read it with your eyes sort of like half focused, right? Where it's like it's all just like absorbed into the, you know, it kind of like it's like you take it in like totally first, right?
Yes.
Rather than it being something which like and just flipping through all of those images which you take in quickly. I think that was kind of like with the box as well, to be able to kind of like, okay, you're getting like more of a sense impression than maybe like the written, the way you would write something, which is like, okay, you start top left.
You start top left.
Right, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. Yeah. But I think, and that sort of understanding of images is what I was sort of wanting to get at with the project, was that I don't know, there's like more to these things, or like I don't know, that maybe it's a personal thing, but I love getting lost and just following lines in these images. And there's maybe it comes back to that thing of the same way of, I know, the same way, but I think we should get more of your, like, look at more of your drawings of like how things, you get lost in this a lot more, I'd say. I don't know. It takes longer to understand what's going on, perhaps. You'll have a different understanding of it than I will.
No, but I think like that, it was sort of, for me, it was like understanding it was like the sort of besides the point almost, you know?
And this reference to man's industrial palaces, it was very intentional. Maybe like it was subconscious. It's very intentional, but really, I don't know. Maybe it came out subconsciously, like how there's qualities to this drawing. There's a darkness to this drawing, which is, you know, like there's this similarity in this, and the building is a machine in some way, or I know of it. It's very nice.
Well, thanks. I'm so glad this conversation is recorded, because I would actually want to hear back what. I think a lot of the things we're talking about, I would like to retain. Maybe.
But these are very nice in terms of a process of, you know, getting like resolving the building and
it was all about like
sessions to work it out.
Exploding that, right, and trying to give equal weight to it, I suppose.
And maybe there's a bit to do with when you're also working on these projects on your own. You actually then have to sort of overwork them a bit.
Right. Okay.
In terms of, if you have someone else there, they can very quickly draw a line that changes the way the drawing is developing. But there's this solitariness which student work, it does rely on an extent that.
That's interesting. I think I don't know, like.
But this is also a really nice way of inhabitation that. I don't know, it suggests there's like, you know, because you can tell it's something that's under construction in this, but also where you used film to illustrate construction as well.
I mean, that's a good point. The film thing was again about that exploration of like, okay, you're taking this, you're trying to sort of like think about things spatially, but also like in terms of time. You know, and you can't. It's really difficult to do. You know, so you've got the timelines. But you can't really do that on a drawing, so you've got the film was like a way of like getting into that, I suppose. It's like giving the drawing a sense of time. So I don't know. Like this was like a quote which I thought it's good to have, because that was like it sums up a lot of the kind of like the intentions, I suppose, of the project. Of like, it just says here, to dwell is to like leave traces, right? You know, so it's like that understanding of inhabitation of like, you know, mark making or trace making, right? Of like, you know, you can tell when someone's been here, or you can tell when something's been worked on, because there's like little crumbs left over. Or,
Yeah. And I think, I know, something that I think I came away from this project thinking about, and I think I definitely heard it, I can't remember who from, but I heard it after the project. But I definitely then thought, oh, I didn't do enough of this, is that architecture is that, or one understanding of architecture, is it's that backbone that lets life play out in all its complexity and beauty, and that is really messy. Like all the things that are like that go on in life that aren't non-straightforward and just I think it also comes back to emotions in a bit of a way, in terms of emotions and life being built on a series of relationships and
I mean, I like what you mean by the backbone, right? Because it's like it somehow suggests like background, you know.
Background,
right?
Yeah.
But it's also like actually, you know, if you break the backbone, you're
you're
in trouble. So like there's kind of like that, which is like okay. And
on a social level, these projects speak of a broken backbone,
right?
Because they're to do with community and community not having the necessary spaces to flourish in. Because we haven't really touched on that. That the program was definitely something that the studio as timber studio and its concerns for, in a way of that timber is something that you care for, and it's also caring about a community in some way that I don't know, might have gone a different direction, or we might have had I could have easily seen myself if I'd had a more open brief, something very industrial, or like purely housing or something. Whereas actually, like I was then able to meld those things together in a way which was nice.
I think it was great. I think and I'm still sort of like now untangling sort of like the implications of like having that brief, I suppose. Right? Like the bits of it which I feel like I kind of was like, great, that's the brief, right? And now it's like, it has more and more resonance with me.
But it's also working in resistance to it.
Okay.
I felt I was working in resistance, and I know the sort of the manifesto that you had to give at the start.
This was
which
great.
is really important. I mean, I think that's the point. It was a few weeks in, and that's the point. I went like, right, this is the way I'm going for the project. And like making those intents and then working to those constraints. That then allows the fiction to come to life. Right. For me anyway.
I mean, this document, the technical brief, was really similar.
We both wrote a fair amount. I don't doubt with critically analysing. I haven't gone for each because they're actually somewhat personal. Definitely. And but I definitely was looking at that a lot when I was going through mine, and I think like as a framework, but also I think for me that your technical brief was it was personal, right? And that was like you know, I feel like I hadn't really seen a lot of that. You know, I feel like often they're kind of like dry. You know, that don't really talk about like the kind of like how you're going to be going about the work, right? And like what kind of things you should be thinking about while you're doing it. It felt like there were, most of the time it's kind of like an outputs kind of sort of thing, or you're checking boxes. So that was really great for me to read and to have that ambition, right? To start to lay the ambitions out. And I was like, I think I was always a bit, you know, afraid of kind of putting them down, you know. Right.
In case, you know, like they actually came true or something. Okay. So I think it kind of like gave me a bit of courage to go like, okay, actually, you know, I'll write this down and then, you know, just to get it out, right?
Because like, I look back and things like I didn't explore that, but writing it down at the time was important, and you then go back in and or like I wrote like some like tactics for myself, or like
I thought it was cool. It was really cool. I'd never really come across anything like that. So,
but it's or like I don't know, just like even the way I wrote things. Like, I don't know, looking back, like to like work seriously with intent between different scales, and then don't be afraid to look scalelessly, or you know, work lightly, invest in lines, which was this whole thing to do with. Like the wireframe grid, which I was even sketching in like a wireframe grid sort of way to try and understand things spatially. Or I don't know, but then also like also things to do with like being forensic. There's like an Irene Scarberry quote, which was to do with architecture involving some detective work, which really resonated with me. Yeah.
Yeah, there is like is a kind of forensic quality, and even as you described, like the log, that's like there's like really you're investigating yourself, right, as well as like the kind of project in some ways, like the kind of like habits which you're doing things, and like how those affect the kind of thoughts which come out. I don't know.
I think that's true.
Imagining that.
And we were both also speaking from a position of having distance from this work now. And also like thinking about what's coming next in our professional and personal practices, which I think is maybe we should look at how we sort of left the ends of the project as a way of I feel we've covered quite a lot of the strands of things that were key to the studio. Would that be fair to say? We've talked a bit about like materiality, community, how we developed things. So I think that was important, was actually the process.
The process was almost everything.
The process was everything for the studio, and I hope that this year's outputs of the studio are also like see those and be involved in those to see how they're that they're also related to process and
So I don't know, my
because you're right, you end in like a series of drawings, or I can't remember. Like
I've got this. I end at the end of my timeline.
Oh right, at the end of your timeline, of course.
Yeah. So
I've got
the big meal, which is like the accumulation of the climax of the fiction, which is like like it's 2065, food poverty is finished. It's we've solved it, right? I guess.
So the buildings, what's the building format?
In a way, it's like
it was,
I guess they
building a new habit or
right. It's like that kind of thing. It's like and the building is like this like byproduct, right? This social issue, like being I guess like it ends like definitely in a point of fantasy, right? Which is like the urban abattoir, right? If there could be such a thing, right? Could that, could the existence of that, like, bring about the resolution of like food poverty?
Yes.
Which is like, okay, like, could you somehow resolve like the kind of tensions in the way that we consume and produce things, right? In such a way that like the I guess like this problem might seem like it's able to be resolved. I don't know. I think that just went.
That would have been about half an hour. So you ended it in the future tense, which I think is really really nice, because I think I ended mine really. Well, I ended it with a collage of the sunset on the croft and the crofters going to bed. I mean, the croft's an aspect we've not really touched about, but there's many aspects of both we've not touched about. But are like, I don't know, too much for one conversation, I think. But this is maybe a bit more process orientated than maybe either of us thought, but I think it's very valuable. But I ended it in this sort of the sun setting on it, whereas yours, I feel was opening up and sort of questioning like a new opportunity in many ways. I don't know.
I mean, you talk about that, like the sun setting. I don't know. Like to me, it was like, okay, now you turn to the back of the beginning of the book and you start reading again, right? You're back at the start, right? Like this is this thing which you can continually like turn over and over, right? There's like a rhythm, a pacing to it. I think that was like, that kind of parallels like the sort of fixation on like habits. I had, but I think in a way that's like
the habits being related to time,
right? Exactly, and like the regularity, and in architecture you talk a lot about like the practice or the discipline, right? And like those things to me feel like so much about time,
Yes,
like, in a way, right? It's like this like returning to, coming back to, like thinking over, and like actually kind of like bringing that into like the way that you've curated your work. I think is kind of powerful. I don't. No.
I think
and like that's like right at the start when you've got your like choose your own adventure bit, right? Which is like you've done this one, come back, and you go again and again, and like and I think having that as like, you know, part of the program as well, which is this like craft, which is this sort of like you're examining what you have like continually and adjusting, and it's more of an attitude, right? And I think like overwhelmingly like that's the feeling that you get from I think your book, which is just like attitude, right? There's like it all kind of coheres into this like sort of stance, right?
But that's, I guess, it comes back to the thing of that is what another understanding of architecture is, that it's if you were to follow the ways of life that an architecture is proposing, it would be quite fundamentally different and hopefully better than what the current condition is. And I mean, yours is exactly that. It's proposing a new habit of way of living. And I think that's like, I think when you talked about the backbone, you know, I think like I really that was one of the main things which, you know, architecture being a backbone, what I kind of wanted to say was like, okay, you know, that maybe building, you know, should be the backbone, right? Like that should be like, you're sort of repositioning this kind of like perspective of like, okay, you know, why should building not be like a part of, you know, life, and in particular, you know, maybe domestic life, right? It's like, okay, you know, the same way that you cook and you clean and you take care of the house, right? Why couldn't you also build the house, right? Like that. And the continual repair and engagement with, you know, material, and like that being this like habit which you establish. Well, capitalism has allowed for something else.
No, definitely. I guess I think one thing I really struggle with, which I feel like you really didn't, was like, you know, that there's like on the one hand a kind of like backwards looking, you know, people, you know, like sort of medieval quality, right, to like the way I've represented it in the kind of like, I guess like stylistic markers, right? But also there's a kind of like maybe there's like you're romanticizing you know, construction too much, right? I feel like one of the things when I got to the end was to really be like, okay, I really wanted to qualify. I even have like a sort of like really awful note at the end, which is like, you know, like I don't want to sound too defensive, but I'm being defensive now, you know. Which is like that. You know, this was meant to be like a forward, you know, sort of thing, right?
Okay,
like,
you know, so I mean, had like.
But your the way you handled the, you know, this like urban kind of crafting, and the way you bring in like this, you know, it feels like a tradition that is at once like continuous, but also like you know,
I hadn't thought of it in that
modern.
sense.
I don't know, right? Which I think
well, it's
like
taking something that's fundamental to a country, Scotland, like a way of life that exists in it, and thinking about it in the context of the contemporary. I guess. It's and it's interesting. Like I know we both then ended with sort of frame images of like important bits. Like this model was very important. This drawing very important. And then I think I then like ended it with some credits.
Which I've ripped off as well completely.
And a thing to do with, I noticed like models were so important that I then said at the end of the project resting in the palm of my hand, and it was this thing of, that was a way to almost have all the work just with me. You could look at it and you could go, well, why did I do that? And that was because of so many different things.
Which is like, it's like the snow globe. Or the, you know, like the book, right? You have that and that's it, right? Because I got like this whole box around, you know.
But there's a really nice tension between the two in that.
It's great. There's like, you know, one is like,
hopefully like a tension that's, I know that it's interesting, the studio, and actually what's great is that a studio with a relatively similar brief managed to produce two incredibly different projects that are very successful in different dimensions and different ways. But I know there's very like, nice.
I guess was there anything that, you know, looking back at you were like, oh, I really wish like I'd have been able to do that, or.
I think I wish I'd put like more emotion into it and let it be a little raw. Like more raw in
You
some
think-
ways.
you
Yeah,
think?
let the defenses down a bit.
I
In a way,
I think yours.
But-
I don't know. I don't quite agree. I feel like
No,
it was that really nice like
Mm.
productive tension between like the kind of like the crystalline kind of quality.
Yeah, right,
With
yeah.
like when you actually get into the writing, it's like it did feel really personal, you know, in a way.
And you, like, what do you feel like? I don't know.
I mean, there were
Yeah,
loads of
you-
drawings which I wanted to do, and I
Right, yeah, but of course, there's always stuff you want to
Exactly,
do. There's always stuff you want to do that
exactly.
never allows. For,
but
But I think that was I then wrote a program for myself. I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
From like maybe a few weeks out towards the end. So then I was like, I'm not going to do any more from that. I didn't leave that potential to that growth perhaps that projects need as they extend. I mean, it's the horrible thing about a deadline. Is that you then at some point have to cut and say, I can't do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I left a lot of threads sort of hanging. Like I didn't. I feel like, and that was sort of. It almost feels like the sprawl is
Right,
like
okay,
the response to that, which is like okay, like I can't actually, pull this all together. So what I'm gonna do is just like,
I'm
like,
just gonna
see where the papers land, right? Like, I suppose. I mean.
Nice. This has been great. I really enjoyed talking through.
It's been it's been good. It's been good.
I think hopefully it's of use for ourselves to look back on. I know it will be, I'm sure, to listen to what we said at some point, and maybe for some others, and as a continued contribution in some ways to the studio, in this idea that I think there's this own trying to like studios have like a life and a they have a life and sort of a continuity to them, and that perhaps this sets precedent for someone else having a similar conversation about work in the future.
I think
Nice.
yeah.
That's us, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.